Lisa.
Hello, how are you?
It's good, good. And I'm so happy to be talking with you. Not only because we're on a podcast and I really enjoyed your book, but also because, you were nearly not here. And so it's
Yes.
just must feel like it feels like an honor to be able to talk to
Oh,
you.
thank you so much. Thank you.
You've written this incredible book, The Crossing, My Near Death Experience with Jesus. And I want to read a little bit from the book's description.
Sure.
One moment, Liza Anderson was planning joyful trips with her husband ahead of her birthday. The next, she was fighting for her life in the ICU, dependent on a ventilator, her body overwhelmed by infection, as doctor prepared her family for the worst. Placed into a 3-week induced coma, she hovered between life and death while her husband, stepdaughter's sister, and loved ones kept vigil at her bedside, waging a desperate battle for her survival. So, I mean, this is an incredible story. Can you tell us the story?
Sure. When that happened, I was in no way in bad health. It was something that, like I said, we were planning trips, we were living our life, everything was going forward, and
You were
it
about
was
52, is that right? You're about
about,
to
yes, it
celebrate?
was 52. Yeah,
Okay.
and there was nothing that was amiss with my health at all.
Hmm. Hmm.
And everything kind of suddenly shifted. Um, and it started with my husband had a flu. I thought when I had the severe stomach pains that I got, that's how it started. I thought, oh, I just have his flu. I just caught something. So then several more days passed and I still had the incredible pain. It would kind of come and go, but I thought maybe I should go to the doctor. So I set up an appointment, and my primary care doctor had left the practice. So I had to go to someone within her group, which was good because I did have my medical history, but I had never met this person before. But anyway, he saw me and he deduced that the pain was from scar tissue that I had from an appendix surgery 14 years earlier. So he said, we need to send you the ER for tests. It was late on a Friday afternoon. He was like, we got to get you over there now because a lot of the doctors leave for the weekend. And so I was kind of whisked to the hospital, which is a major academic medical center in downtown Chicago. Um, I waited several hours there to be seen. They saw me and did some tests, and the ER doctor said that the test came back sort of inconclusive. So what they wanted to do was keep me over the weekend for dehydration, etc., watch me, and then give me a CT scan on Monday. And so at the time, it was Friday night, by that time, 10 p.m. I thought it was too late to, I thought it was too bad to just wait until
Right,
Monday.
right,
But, this was kind of the direction that they were going with. And so,
right. And
um,
they're the professionals, right? I mean, what are you going to do when they say,
right,
yeah,
right.
you got to wait? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and Monday came. I was told to take 2 liters of barium prior to the CT scan, which I hadn't eaten or drank anything all weekend. I was on IVs, etc. And I questioned the nurse, and she's like, well, that's what the doctor ordered. And nobody monitored me while I was drinking the barium. I just kind of drank it fast because I wanted to get it over with. And so, sure enough, I began to feel nauseous, and they were wheeling me into the CT scanner. And the tech said, if you're gonna get sick, just turn your head to the right. We'll go through with the test. And so, sure enough, I got sick in the CT scanner. And at that point, when I was wheeled back to my room, I was feeling very lightheaded and dizzy. And I had to call for the nurse because I couldn't dress myself. I couldn't stand up really. The next thing I knew, there were like 8 doctors around me. My oxygen levels had really dropped. And so they're all saying she looks blue, we need to get her to the ICU. And by this point, my husband had come and he's like, what's going on? What's wrong? And he's like, we don't have time to talk. We just need to you to the ICU. The next day is when I really started fading in and out of being able to talk and things like that. That day, they did tell me the x-rays that I took under the CT scanner showed that scar tissue caused a blockage, and that was the original problem, which they could have done surgery on right away. However, the fact that my lungs were covered in infection, they said we can't do the surgery. We've got to have her lungs be stable
Yeah.
before we do the surgery.
Because when you'd thrown up the barium, it had
Yes, it
aspirated
coated
into
my
your lungs.
lungs.
Oh,
Correct. And what happened was I got acute respiratory distress syndrome, which they later told us that's a 35 to 50% mortality rate when you have ARDS. And so they took my husband aside and said, your wife's she may not make it. We can't operate on the original problem because we've got to wait for her lungs to get stable. She can no longer fight this on her own because she's not breathing well. So we're going to have to put her in an induced coma. That's going to be the best way for her survival. My husband signed the papers for that, and I went into the induced coma for 3 weeks.
I mean, that seems so long. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
yes, I
It
mean,
was
and
amazing. It was
yeah.
just, yeah, very traumatic. And so during those 3 weeks is when I had the two profound experiences.
Hmm.
Um, and one was the choice to live or die, and the other was an encounter with Jesus.
At some point in here, you write about it. Everything I was on earth as Liza Anderson was stripped away, and yet I was still there. My essence
Yes.
remained. Like
Yes.
you, it's such a profound thought just to think about having that stripped away and and being stripped from not only your body but that identity and
Yeah,
still remain.
in the coma, I still had my identity, as best as I can describe it. And so when I was experiencing the choice to live or die, I found myself in a hotel room, and I understood that I would watch the life review, and that I would be going to heaven. That's what I understood, and I never really saw anything on the screen. But I felt a warm, comforting feeling, and it was just very nice. But when it was over, I realized I was still alive, and I actually was a little bit disappointed at that point for some
Right.
reason. I thought it was going to be this
Yeah.
great. So I walked out of the hotel room down a long hallway, and there was an entity at that end of the hallway. It wasn't Jesus or God, or it was a shadowy figure, and it said, if you go right, you can just drift off, and everything will be so happy. And if you go left, you'll suffer a lot, but you'll eventually be okay. And so in my head, I thought, wouldn't that be like committing suicide if I went right? Like, I have to come back and fight to live, right? And so with that, no more, that entity disappeared. And that's when I knew I was alive. And I chose that other dilemma.
And then the
So,
other profound experience you had was with Jesus.
right. And these experiences are not linear, they seem to happen simultaneously.
Right.
They were just experiences.
And
And
that
so,
makes it so interesting to write about, right? And talk about, which is like
yeah,
we're trying to apply
yeah,
logic and time and linear thinking to something that is beyond that.
beyond,
Is that
exactly.
right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So, in the other experience, I found myself in an ocean like atmosphere. There were shadowy figures around me. I didn't know any of them, but it was just nice. I'm just experiencing whatever was around me. And then all of a sudden, I was propelled upward to bright lights, bright white robes I saw. And it was so bright, I really couldn't look at it. So I was looking down. I couldn't, it was just too bright. But then I heard a voice that said, just look at me, just focus on me. Don't worry about things swirling around you, just look at me. And so I looked up and I looked into the eyes of Jesus, which were like, it's indescribable. It was a kaleidoscope of colors, and I felt like I was looking through to infinity. That's why on my book cover I have the kaleidoscope of colors. It was the most beautiful thing, and I didn't feel any judgment or just unconditional love at that moment of looking into his eyes, like you would never believe.
Hmm.
And then the next thing that happened, he touched my right shoulder, and then I went spiraling downwards. It was a brief encounter, but an impactful one, and just ethereal, really.
Right. Right. And
So,
so amazing. So you come out of the coma and you have months of rehab and recovery to go. I think at one point, you had to learn how to breathe, swallow, speak, and walk, and all the things you take for granted. So you're doing all this work, but you came out of that experience with some really profound and poignant lessons that you took
Yeah.
away from that. Can you tell us about what those were?
Yeah, and it was surreal coming out of the coma. It was extremely frightening. My hands had to be tied to the bed because I had tubes everywhere. There were multiple medical tests every day. The knowledge of my scars was traumatic to see. You wake up and all of a sudden you're seeing yourself having a lot of scars and just traumatic surroundings.
Because when you were in the coma, the blockage from your scar tissue
Intestines. Hmm.
in your intestines became a problem, right? And
It
so they
became
had
a
to do,
problem, yes.
yeah.
And they
And
had
so
to
they
do
did,
surgery while I was still in the coma as well. Yeah. When I went through all that terror, kind of that frightening stuff and all the tests, I really took back the message of to focus on Jesus and just keep my focus on that. Don't worry about things swirling around you, which was everything, chaos was swirling around me. So that message, I was able to take that back with me to help me recover and get through all this really traumatic and horrific stuff that when you're not expecting anything like this to happen, and it does, it's a lot of trauma.
right,
So
right.
so that was one thing that helped me get through all of that in the hospital. The
So
other,
it's just sort of a calm focus. It's
yes. Well, when I'm sitting there in pain or when I'm sitting there waiting for a medical test, my focus is on Jesus and just the very moment with him and how scared I am, and that I feel love, and that no matter what happens, everything's going to be okay. That's what I felt. And that's why I say that some of those moments were the best time of my life in the worst of circumstances, because to feel that strength is incredible. I always was very spiritual, but when you're really up against it and you really feel that going through it, and it's an incredible feeling.
yeah, yeah. One of my favorite authors, Mark Nebo, writes about it. It's no secret that cancer, in its acuteness, pierced me into open living. And I've been working ever since to sanctify that open living
Hmm.
without crisis as its trigger.
Hmm.
But can
Yes.
this be done without crisis pushing us off the ledge? That's the question now, years from the leap. How to keep leaping from a desire to be real so as not to be shoved by an ever lurking crisis. I mean, and I thought when I read your story, it reminded me of that because you're trying to bring that lesson that you learned in that trauma and painful experience and recovery into your life, right?
Yes, yeah, yes. And it's a practice. When I came out of the coma, I really felt like I was living that way. Like I was living moment to moment, focusing on what needed to be next and just not analyzing anything, but just doing and being present. And our day to day life, most people don't live like that. You're kind of thinking of the future and the past and what did I do wrong or right. And so for me, it's a practice to get back to that because I know the value in it. And I mean, I guess, when I visit that kind of space, it's mostly in nature or through meditation. That's how I get back to that state. But even just during a simple day, that's the other thing I wanted to mention was I had a different kind of knowledge in the other realm. And it was just very pleasurable. Just, moment to moment, everything was moving seamlessly. Like I said, there's no judgment. There was no analysis of what's going to happen in the future or anything analyzing the past. It was just really seamless living in the present, very enjoyable, and it's something that I think is I strive to emulate every day. Everything is just the flow of life. Is if you not don't resist and just go forward doing the best you can, and there's always challenges and goals, but don't resist the out and don't look for outcomes based on what you want necessarily, because they
Yeah.
may not happen. But the adventure of life is just the doing, and it's not so much about the outcomes, is really what I
Yeah.
learned.
It's such a great takeaway from reading your story and hearing your story is that whole wisdom of being present,
Yeah.
not worrying about what happens next, not worrying about the outcome, just being present for that moment and knowing that it'll all be okay.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
then my roommate in rehab
Hmm.
was a stroke survivor, and she was an inspiration to me because she would go out every evening with her girlfriends. She's probably in her 60s, but they would come, she'd have makeup on and a nice outfit, and she was in a wheelchair, but she would go out laughing. And if you're ill and you feel like you're weak and you feel like, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing that. Maybe I
Yeah.
should just be resting. But I was like, I started to think, why can't I do that? At least
Yeah.
for a time period. And so I did start doing that even in rehab. My
Yeah.
husband and I went out to dinner. We went by the beach and walked. I was in my wheelchair walking down the beach
Yeah.
watching a wedding one time just
Right.
because it was happening.
Yeah.
And that for recovery is so important. And I did take that when I was home. I did the same thing. I wanted to keep my life as regular as possible and go out and have, dinners and festivals and concerts and everything that a Chicago summer offers. Really,
Yes.
I did
Right.
that summer, and that really brought me back to myself.
And you
And
write
how,
about that so well because, and I love your husband's response, but you write about it. John, I said one evening, I want to be like my roommate in rehab. I don't want us to stop doing things like go to plays and outdoor concerts and dinners and festivals this summer, just like always. I'm all in, he says, smiling. I mean, and that response and is so good because he's like, yeah, I'm there.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and we had a great summer. It was really, yeah, and I don't keep in touch with my roommate from rehab, but I wish that she knew what an effect she had on me
yeah,
because
yeah.
it was really an important lesson, I think. Um,
But while you're experiencing all these great lessons, I mean, one of the things that was interesting to me as a reader of your book is that your husband John is having to really navigate the medical system and advocate for you. You
yeah,
are having to go through all the pain and trauma, but he had his own experience
he did. Yeah,
of
absolutely.
there were so many things that were avoidable and that he
Right.
was having to advocate for.
Yeah.
What did you
Yeah.
learn about the kind of the medical system through that?
A couple things, the importance of a primary care doctor and the importance of family and friends as advocates for when you are in pain and when you're weak, because hospital systems move very fast. It's somewhat chaotic, especially at a teaching hospital where you have a lot of different teams of doctors seeing you. I had so many different, one team would see me one day and the next team would see me the next day. There was notes and things, but it was very chaotic in that sense because there was no continuity, I felt like. Just a couple examples was the ER situation when I was sent off to the ER late on a Friday. My original primary care doctor, I don't think would have ever done that. I know that because I talked to this about my current primary care doctor said that should never have happened. With the pain I was in, the seriousness of it, you don't send somebody with no follow-up to the ER doctors. You got to connect the dots. My surgeon had told me later, there's no way you should have waited till Monday to have the CT scan. That was an admitted mistake, really. If you have a good primary care doctor, they're not going to that knows your history, that knows you well, that would have been a different situation. The other situation was when I had to drink the 2 liters of barium. I was alone and I did question it, but I feel like there would have been more pushback had my husband been there and even going into the CT scanner, like saying, like, we got to reschedule this. She's not well, you
Yeah.
know. And I just feel like, that was obviously the start of everything, that
Mm-hmm.
piece. And so um,
Right.
that was another moment when I didn't have family and friends with me, and everyone in good faith was trusting that I was at a top hospital, that nothing like this would go wrong. But, it does. And you kind of get lost in the system sometime if there's not family and friends there.
And if I
Um,
understand right, the hospital changed their procedure about
they did, yeah, after
the
we wrote
barium.
them and the barium, yeah. Because that is a very controversial um, practice to have someone drink barium when there might is a potential blockage, which they did know about. And then the other time was when I was in the induced coma, and my husband had to say, my wife's blown up to 2 times her size. And there's something really wrong. And, they said, well, we still can't operate on her because of the lungs aren't stable enough. And then there were more discussions like, you got to do something. And that's when they operated on me when I was in the coma.
Right.
Um,
Right.
because
Wow.
again, no one would have known that I wasn't truly that size because there was
Yeah.
no consistency of doctors. And so you need the family there to be watching out for that.
Right.
So those were
Right.
like three moments that I found
Mm.
as a patient kind of traumatic, scary, and
Hmm. Right? And you're in a coma, so you have to have
I
other
mean,
people
at that point,
advocating.
yeah.
Yeah,
But in
right.
other moments, I was kind of alone, and it was like, what,
Yeah.
it is sort
Yeah.
of, if you had more, it's just something that's really, really important.
Yeah. True. So I'm delighted that you chose to come back because we're having this conversation. But what now in retrospect, what do you think you came back to try to do? Do you have wisdom about?
Yeah, originally I really wanted to come back, because I didn't want to leave my husband. We had only been married 11 years, and I really wanted to, have more life with him, grow old together, experience retirement, grandkids, travel. That was the initial call back. I feel like I was really being, that's where I wanted to come back most, was for him. And then after reflection, I realized, I was called to kind of really tell my story, tell what happened. I was living proof of the power of prayer. Countless people were praying for me. And I came back and handled impossible situations through that power of prayer. So that's a very important, I think, message to tell. And then just simply that, if I want people to take something away from this story, it's like that you're truly loved, you're never alone, prayer does matter, and heaven is real. And so I experienced all those things, and you want to tell that story, as many other people have done with near death experiences, obviously, too. So,
It's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and I'm so grateful that you came on to tell us your story and pass on your experience
thank you.
and message.
And
Thank
thank
you,
you. It was
Lisa.
great talking with you.
Oh, my pleasure's mine. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.